Hello there friends, it's Cassie and welcome back for another video here on my YouTube channel. Today I'm going to be showing you the Hero Arts September card kit. One of you was so kind enough to send this to me, and so thank you. Let's go ahead and take a look at it. It is an absolutely gorgeous kit. It comes with a beautiful stamp set, and that stamp on there is big and bold and beautiful, and I love it. And then there are 4 sentiments that go with it, but that is big. It covers the whole front of an A2 size card basically, with just a little bit to show. But yeah, it's a great stamp set, and it also comes with 5 stencils. Yeah, 5 stencils, which makes the coloring process for this so easy. You're also going to get a blender brush, and it's awesome, nice and soft. It'll work just like any of your other blender brushes that you might have, or if you're new to them, this one's a good one to start with. Then you're going to get 4 ink cubes in various colors there. And the back of the card is going to show you the way to use these stencils and how it's going to work and what colors you're supposed to use. This kit is also going to come with matching dies. It has 1 big die for your big image, and then it also has 2 shadow dies that say thanks and hello. But check it out, 5 stencils. It's great. So we're going to use it in 2 different ways. Our first we're going to do is put in a piece of cardstock. This is some white cardstock. It's A2 size, so it measures 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inches. I'm going to stick that into my mini Misty, and then we're going to ink it up with that darkest color that came in this kit, which was root beer. So I'm just inking that up. I wanted to just kind of stick to mostly what was in this kit, and we'll stamp that out a couple of times. So stamp it once. I end up needing to stamp it a few times because it's a fairly detailed stamp, which is actually pretty nice. Sometimes that, you first look at it, it can be a little bit intimidating, but I actually love these detailed stamps because it takes some of the work away. You don't have to be as detailed with maybe your coloring even. And then you add this stencil to it and whole nother bit. So it's great because this stamp is going to work well with the stencil, but it's also great because you could use it with any of your mediums that you might have, whether it be alcohol markers or colored pencils or watercolor or whatever you want to do. But we're just going to use the stencil. So I've pulled out my Wendy Vecchi Make Art Station. I just thought this one might be one of the easier ways to hold this down. And this is going to work great for the stamped image. Now later on, you'll notice there are little squares in each of those corners. Those are going to come in super handy for when you don't want to use the stamp and you just want to use the stencil. I'm just going to go ahead and use the blender brushes that I already have. So I'll use a yellow one, and I end up getting like splotches of color here and there, but honestly I don't mind. If you look at flowers, they're going to be different colors in different areas. It's not going to be all completely uniform, so that really does not bother me. I actually like that it's a little bit deeper and darker in some areas and it's a little bit lighter in others. It really just had a lot to do with how much I was pressing down onto the ink pad before I brought it to my paper, and then just kind of going right in without trying to be light-handed. I went heavy-handed the whole way, but it looks good. And yeah, I'm kind of focusing mostly on the petals. I'm not so concerned about the middles. Those will get covered by the other stencils. So then I'll pull this away and kind of be amazed at how well that stencil works with that stamp set. And then we can bring in our second stamp set, or second die, or stencil. But it's at this point that I'm kind of realizing I finally see those squares, and I'm thinking maybe what it would be best to do is use some copy paper, and I do have it on top of my Wendy Vecchi Make Art Station, so I can still use my magnets, but I'm going to line up that first one again, and then I can just mark where the squares are. So that's all I'm doing is marking it. It isn't quite as important for this part since you have the stamped image, but it is helpful. So I'm going to stick that down, but actually I realized what I should probably do is tape it down first. So eventually I'll grab out my mint tape and I'll realize I need to do that. But I think it's after this part. Yeah, so I'm going to go ahead and use the next color, the next part of this stencil, and I'm using an orange blender brush because this is more of an orangey brown, which is really pretty on top of that yellow, and they mix really well together. And yeah, getting splotches again, but again, doesn't bother me. Just kind of goes to that realisticness of this stamp itself. So then here's where I'll pull these away. and realize I should probably put down some tape, because I don't want that to move too much. So I'll just tear that in half and put a couple pieces, and it didn't move, but I just highly recommend it. All right, so then we bring in our next stencil and lining it up over the top of those squares. And again, it's not as important here. It will be when I do the next one. And so I'll just blend that brown over the top. I don't want to blend too crazy hard because I did use that color to stamp my image, and I don't want the detail of the flower underneath to get completely lost. So I'm not going as heavy-handed as I could, but we are definitely a little darker than the other colors. So then I'll pull this one away, and you'll see we're getting there. It's just so cool, and I love the colors that they picked. We bring in the next stencil, which actually I grabbed the wrong one, so I'll realize this here in a second, but you have 4 colors, and it's this green one that you're going to end up using twice. So I'll realize it here in a second, pull that stencil away, and put the 4th actual stencil down, and that's just going to be for the leaves. And then we'll put some color down. Miles is going to join us because, of course, we're using something inky where he could get his paws in it. Thankfully, he doesn't. But we'll cover that, pull it away, and then we'll bring in that 5th stencil. But look at how cool this is looking. And I've noticed this color is one that will kind of set on top of the other colors, one of those hues. And so it is going to go over that brown, but it sets on there nicely. It isn't too bright on there, but it definitely sets on the brown. And then take a look at that. All that great detail, and you didn't have to color it, although you could. So you definitely have options with this stamp set. All right, so now I want to just use the stencils. So this is where I'm going to kind of line up my paper under there. And then once I'm happy with how that's going to be put down, I'll grab out some more of that mint tape and tack down my paper. And here we're going to rely solely on those squares. So I'll put the magnets on the top, grab out my yellow ink, and then we'll go through that whole process again of blending that color on, mostly sticking to the outside edges. All right, move on to our next stencil. Line it up over those squares. And of course, this isn't going to be as detailed, obviously, because you don't have a stamped image under there. But this gives a really cool effect. So once again, moving on to the next color, we'll blend all that on there. Pull that away. Again, not concerned about the splotches. That doesn't bother me. I kind of like that variation, even especially on this one. Bring in our 3rd stencil, move on to the brown, the root beer, which now makes me want to drink a root beer. I love root beer. Pull those away, love it, and then we'll bring in the 4th stencil. Line that up again where those squares are super handy. And keep in mind, I never watched any videos on this. I probably should have, but I sometimes just like to fly by the seat of my pants and see if I can figure things out. And I did. This was very easy to figure out. And then we'll bring in that final stencil. I'm sure there's a lot of great videos on this, but I just haven't had the time to go and look. So here you go. Final details. And once I pull that away, yeah. Super cool. So I love that you can use these stencils with or without that stamp set. So now let's make a couple of cards using these. Love it, love it. All right, for our first card, we aren't going to use this one that is just used with the stencils. We're going to use this stamped one, but I'm showing you how that die matches over the top of that. I'm going to tack down my die over the top of that with some mint tape, and then I'm going to mark on my paper 1 inch from the bottom. There's a reason for that. I just want to cut off part of this. I'm going to do some partial die cutting. So I'm not die cutting the whole image out. I'm going to bring in my die cutting machine, and then I'm going to take some more of that mint tape and tack this down. You'll see the lines that I marked line up with the very edge of my plate. So that way, once I flip this over and run this through my die cutting machine, the only thing that will get cut is everything that is under that. It doesn't cut away. I do need to do a little bit more cutting. So I'm going to pull in my Fiskars paper trimmer, line it up with the lines that I marked, and then we're just going to go right to where it did die cut. I love partial die cutting. It's just a fun thing I sometimes forget about, but with a big old die and stamp like this, it's a little easier to do. So then there's one spot where it didn't cut through, so I'm just going to go ahead and cut that with my scissors and take a look at that. We have some partial die cutting. Now I'm going to bring in my base, which is just measuring 5.5 inches by 8.5 inches, scored at 4 1/4, so it is a side folding. Well, in this case, it's going to be a top folding A2 size card. And I'm trying to decide what I want to do, so I'm going to bring in my guillotine trimmer and trim off just an inch off the bottom there. And we'll see that that lines up perfectly. Love it. All right, so I decide that I want some of that brown to show through, so I'm going to take some more of my mint tape, line it up on my glass mat, and just mark off an inch. And then I'm going to take direct to paper using that ink and just rub that right on that paper, and it will even itself out, so don't get worried if you're like, oh, it looks splotchy. As it dries, it blends itself out. Clean up my mess, pull away that mint tape, and then it is a perfectly brown line at the bottom. I do bring in another Copic. This is the G02, or I guess this is the only Copic I brought in. I want to put a little bit of a glow around our flower, and that G02 is almost like a mint color, which is really, really pretty. So all I'm doing is adding a border all around the outside of our flower. And it makes it look like it's glowing on the outside. It almost kind of makes the flower pop off the paper a little bit. So you can do this with just about any color that you want. You could do it with a light gray. I thought this mint would be pretty. You could do it with like even a pink would be nice too. Or potentially a light orange. But this mint, ooh, yeah. Mama loves the mint. All right, and now we'll just go ahead and glue that down. I do make a mistake and I add glue to the pieces that hang over the edge, which I wasn't thinking. So then when I stick this down, that glue transfers as you see here. So I'll just wipe that away with my fingers. It kind of adds to the handmade element of the card, right? So there you have it. I'll rub that away. I'm not that worried about it. I'm going to take that piece that I cut off earlier and I'm going to rub the ink right over this. I want to stamp my sentiment on there. And this is the best way to make a piece that would completely match, like a piece of paper. So then I'll put my magic powder bag over it and then test it, because I do want to emboss it with some white embossing powder. And if it sticks, then I need to dry it some more. But it didn't stick. We're good. So I'll add more magic powder bag, bring out the stamp that I want along with some clear embossing ink. That's some juicy one. A juicy embossing ink by Ink on 3. And then I'll cover it with my white embossing powder and then heat set that till that is smooth and melted. And then we'll get ready to trim this down and put that on our card front. I'll use some liquid glue to adhere that down, and then I just knew I needed more for this card. So I'm going to pull in some Brillant Citrine gems. These are from Trinity stamps. They're gorgeous. And so I'll just put those into a little pot, grab out my pickup stick, and place those on there. I've said this 1,000 times. I always struggle with placement. But at the end of the day, if it makes your eye happy, it makes you happy, then just put them wherever you want. And I was pretty liberal. But there is our first card. I love how that turned out. Our second card is going to be a slimline. I went ahead and die cut it out. And I also die cut the sentiment. I stamped out thanks from, or not stamped it out, I die cut it out of the leftover piece of that piece of cardstock that I kind of made with that brown ink. And now I'm going to bring in, it's about a 4-inch by 8.5-inch piece of cardstock, and I'm going to spritz some of that bubbling cauldron mica stain all over it. This stuff isn't available anymore, but I have to use it. It's so pretty. And I just sprayed that all over that regular piece of white cardstock, and I'm just going to heat set that, and then I'm going to trim it down. So I'm going to trim off about a 1/4 inch from each of these sides. This will make it a 3.5-inch by 8.5-inch piece of cardstock. And then I realize, after I'm kind of testing that out, I want some of the white border from my card base to show. So I'm just going to cut off a sliver off of this one long side and this one shorter side. It's just enough that when I have my card base, which I have here, which measures 7 inches by 8.5 inches and is scored at 3.5 inches, once I put that panel on top of that base, you're going to notice a little white border, and I like that. I didn't want it to be too big, but I did want it to be there. So let's go ahead and glue that down. Normally I wouldn't do that, but I want to put some foam tape behind my flower, and that might stick beyond our green panel. So I've got that down. Now I'm going to use foam tape. Well, I'll adhere down my thanks to the white shadow that I have, using some more of that liquid glue, and then I'll pull in some foam tape. I decided to just put the foam tape only on the flowers, and then I'll just pull off all that release paper on the back of the flower. And you'll notice, you know, from die cutting, part of the leaf didn't show, or, you know, it didn't cut, so we're going to go ahead and line that up right on the edge. Kind of fun. And then I'm going to take that liquid glue and adhere down our thanks. Now, I did put it right in the middle. I sort of wish I'd have brought it down a little further, but it's fine. It works. And then I'm going to be really, really liberal with these ANDRADITE sparkle gems from Trinity stamps. They're just gorgeous. Put those all over that background, and that's going to finish off our second card. Take a look at that sparkle, though. Ooh. Whew. Anyway, all right, so let's go ahead and take a look at both of the cards that I made. I would love to know what you think. Do you like the stencil without the stamp, or do you like the stamp with the stencil better? Go ahead and leave that down in the comment section down below. If you liked this video, be sure to hit the like button, and definitely consider subscribing if you haven't already done so. As always, I will see you very soon in another video. Thanks, everybody. Bye.